Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
The other astonishing aspect of this book is here's this American who settled in England, who's writing on cricket in such original terms. I mean, he's reeling off sentence after sentence about Sachin Tendulkar that you haven't read in your match reports. Like, what is this? I've been following Tendulkar for so long. Why have I not read anything about him? And here you have this American guy coming and writing such brilliant prose and original prose.
War Minus the Shooting, a book that talks about the 1996 World Cup and was published in 1998. Combining personal reflection and social observation, this work paints a complex portrait of a subcontinent in ferment, set against the backdrop of the 1996 World Cup, the most extravagant and controversial event in the long history of the game. The book delves into the dilemmas that dog modern cricket: ball tampering, biased umpires, media moguls and sponsors, race and national identity, gambling syndicates, and much more. In this conversation that took place in December 2021 during the Bangalore Literature Festival at Bangalore International Centre, Siddharth Vaidyanathan and Sharda Ugra discuss Mike Marquesee and the revival of the book as the event it covers turned 25. Over to Sharda and Siddharth.
Hello to Siddhartha. We've been friends and sort of colleagues for a bit. And we will tell you the story of this absolutely astonishing book, which I would request all of you buy. Previously, until now, all you got of War Minus the Shooting was on ebook via Amazon. But it's here, and we'll tell you this incredible story of how it came to be. Firstly, Siddhartha, welcome. Good evening. What time is it in Seattle where you are? And we are all bright and early and chirpy. And are you just sort of fading fast? He's the father of 2 daughters, one very young.
It's always evening in Seattle. Sleepless, as they say.
Sid, let's start talking about the book. War Minus the Shooting was published 25 years ago. It's written by Mike Marquesee, whom, again, both of us will also speak about. It's a book about a writer traveling through India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka during the 1996 World Cup. The first remarkable part about the book is that India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka held a World Cup together, with the usual chaos that there existed in their organization and everything, but it was successful. It was pulled off with a great flair. The semi-final was held in Calcutta. The final was held in Lahore. And you're thinking about all these things 25 years later and saying that it doesn't seem like it was possible. Before the World Cup, they had a joint India-Pakistan team, traveled to Sri Lanka in solidarity of the Sri Lankan, of Sri Lanka and Colombo, which had a very, very huge and a devastating bomb attack in central Colombo. They traveled together. They all wore whites. They played a limited overs match. And Mike Marquesee has written all these stories. Siddhartha, tell us about when did you come to the book? What fascinated you about it? And when you look at it 25 years from now, does it all look virtually impossible? Like, how did it even happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you did mention that the semi-final happened in Calcutta and the final in Lahore. The quarter-final happened in the very city where you're sitting in. And what a game that was. India-Pakistan in Bangalore. I mean, when are we going to see that next? I don't know. I came to the book in early 2000s. I would say around 2004, I think. 2003, 2004, when I just joined Cricinfo. Actually, I found this book in Sambit Bal's office. Sambit Bal being the editor of Cricinfo then and continues to be the editor of Cricinfo now. And I picked it up and I read it. And of course, the 1996 World Cup was formative for me. I mean, for somebody, I was studying in school back then, to watch that tournament under lights, to come back home from school and then to watch Tendulkar blasting attacks here and there. I mean, that is growing up, right? That is how many of us grew up. And then to read that, but to read Mike Marquesee was to understand how little I understood of that World Cup, because I knew what happened. I knew scores, I knew wickets and runs and all that. But Mike Marquesee's book was the big picture. Like, if you want to understand the World Cup, if you want to understand the countries at the time, the political aspects, the social aspects, the disparities, and the corporatization that the game that was seeping into the game. And so that really blew me away back in 2003, 2004. And then, of course, I've read it multiple times over the years and learned so much about it. And, so 25 years later, which was in March this year, when that World Cup turned 25, I thought, what better way to commemorate that World Cup and celebrate that World Cup than discuss the book, for which, of course, I contacted you to come on my podcast and to talk about it.
I was a journalist at the time during the 96 World Cup. I was one of the younger. I used to work for the Hindu. I traveled. I did a couple of games at that World Cup. I was sent to Sri Lanka just after the bomb attack. And my family believed that, nobody else wanted to go. So they sent you. They sent the youngest person. Anyway, they sent the girl. So I had met Mike Marquesee. I'd read his earlier work. And I sensed that World Cup. I felt it very palpably in a way when I was traveling. It was a time that, to me, which I talked about in the podcast, marked the moment where we went from being a fairly sort of civil cricketing country to becoming jingoistic. And what we didn't tell at the time, we didn't see at the time. If I tell younger people now, all of you, anyone who was born, say, after 1996, that Indians would clap for boundaries when they were hit by foreign cricketers, and they watched test matches with complete calm, and you rarely saw flags on stadiums. In fact, when in 1987, as a young spectator, I carried a flag, and I was the only one in the entire stadium who had a flag, which I bought from Khadi Bhavan. And so it was that part. This is 96. The country is changing, but we don't see how. And Mike saw it in his book because he brought a very unique and a very original view to cricket at large, not just this event. He was able to use that view and those eyes and that background to come into this, to tell us what that event was like, what it stood for, and what it was going to become. And now when you look back on it, you realize how many things. It was such a prescient book, and he was such a prescient writer. Sid, did you get to meet Mike at any point in time? Mike is a friend of mine. He passed away a few years ago from cancer. But Sid, did you ever get to meet him or hear him speak? Or did you read anyone but England? Which is Mike's first and most famous book.
This is actually the first book of Mike's that I read. But then after this, of course, I went and read Anyone But England and was blown away by that as well, and continue to be blown away. I mean, even as recently as this month, and we are talking about English cricket and the racism there, and Asim Rafiq and all the allegations. I mean, Mike saw all that years ago when he wrote about the racism in Yorkshire. And then, of course, I read other books by Mike on, Muhammad Ali. He has written a fantastic book on him. And then I read a wonderful book by him about the the British elections in 1990, where the Labour Party basically snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, which is the title of the book. So, yeah, I mean, marvelous writer on variety of subjects. But also, talking about meeting Mike, it's amazing how I met Mike once. And that was during the launch of another fabulous book about the subcontinent, which was Pandits from Pakistan. And this was by Rahul Bhattacharya. And the book launch for that was in Bangalore. One of the launches was in Bangalore. I went for that. And Mike was there along with his partner, Liz. And I got introduced to Mike and I spoke to him briefly. And in fact, we ended up talking more about baseball than about cricket, which is probably par for course with Mike, because you would talk about things that you would least expect with him anyway.
So Mike Marquesee was an American born on the East Coast from a fairly politically active family. He was Jewish, and he moved to England where he met Liz, whom he called his favorite English person, Liz Davies. She's an advocate. And I met Mike in 96 and slightly earlier. Anyone But England is literally like a rewriting of cricket history from the point of view of an outsider as to what it looks like to him. And for all of us, that was a book that said, finally, he's saying what, all of us are reading. When we grew up in the 70s and the 80s, all that was good about cricket was written about English cricket or Australian cricket, or we didn't have as much, or we didn't have access to it. And Mike literally took this and he just shredded it to pieces. And that's when I met him. And he'd written a novel called Slow Turn. The first line of that book starts, it's a detective book or a crime fiction. It says, in Madras, the umpire was murdered, and that made us uneasy. That was the first line of the book. And that's it. I was sold. I read the whole book and I started reading. So I knew Mike, and I knew about his anger. against injustice. That was his thing. But he also had fun. So Sid, War Minus the Shooting is full of these brilliant descriptions of cricket and of cricketers, that he's at a very perfect distance with cricket. He loves cricket. He loves cricketers, but he understands and he can see through all the blah that was suddenly beginning to build. In War Minus the Shooting, there's a brilliant chapter. There's a brilliant section of him meeting one of the heads of Pepsi, who said, what is it? No, there's nothing official about it, or is it? Yahi hai right choice.
Yahi hai right choice.
And Mike could talk about anything. He, at one point in time, his friend says his brain was like a sponge. So when he passed away and they had his sort of a tribute function for him, he said his brain was like a sponge, because he'd be speaking 1 second, like he said, about baseball, and then about qawwalis. He had got fully into Sufi music. And so he was that kind of a writer, very much the kind of writer that I think you need to have, who's slightly distant from all the inner sort of workings. Tell us about your discovery of the great cricket bits of the book. You were a young cricket journalist, and you came across this book, and you said, what is this? Can the sport be written about in this way?
The book is, fascinating on two levels. One is it looks at sport in the big picture level. It looks like the politics of sport, the sociology of sport, the culture of sport. And for that, you require the kind of capacious mind that only a few people have. And Mike had that. He understood cricket as much as he understood baseball. He understood cricket as much as he understood jazz and blues and so many other things that he knew. So that
poetry.
was poetry and Marxism, and I can keep going. But the other astonishing aspect of this book is, here's this American who settled in England, who's writing on cricket in such original terms. I mean, he's reeling off sentence after sentence about Sachin Tendulkar that you haven't read in your match reports. Like, what is this? I've been following Tendulkar for so long. Why have I not read anything about him? And here you have this American guy coming and writing such brilliant prose and original prose. And I think that was amazing, because he wasn't tied up with, he nudged a boundary and he hammered this bowler and all. He wasn't tied down to the grammar of cricket like many of us were while writing on cricket. He just knew how to express himself and talk about the observations of the game. And he did it brilliantly. I mean, there's this passage when he's writing about Tendulkar in that Wankhede innings, when Tendulkar played like one of the most astonishing innings for 90 against Australia. I mean, if you haven't seen that innings, then you haven't seen Tendulkar, is what I will say as a 40-year-old man. But Mike actually captures it. And he says how Tendulkar is doing something astonishing here, because he's combining the classical test match batsmanship that the Mumbai school of batting embodies, with Merchant and Gavaskar and so on and so forth. But he's also bringing in the modern touch for the masses. And so he's combining the classical with the mass. And I had never seen anyone describe Tendulkar like that before, but I have always, from that point, thought of Tendulkar in that way. So that's the impression Mike has left on me.
So the most fun part about this talk is going to tell all of you how this book came to be republished. So Sid, take it away.
Mike was a very ardent fan of Sri Lanka, and he writes very, very lovingly about the Sri Lankan cricketers and that Sri Lankan team, which of course went on to win that World Cup. And some of the passages that he writes on Aravinda de Silva are just phenomenal. I mean, I don't think anybody has written as well about Aravinda as Mike has done in that book. But anyway, so we spoke about it. We had a podcast. And then after that, some of our listeners really enjoyed the podcast. And then the next obvious question was, where do we get this book? Where is this book? I mean, there's no way we can find it. And on Amazon, interestingly, the only used copies that were available were going for $900 and $1,000, like US dollars. So people are like, I really enjoyed your podcast, but I can't sell both my kidneys to read this book. I'm very sorry. So then we said, obviously this is a fair point. So thanks to Sharda again, I said, why not I get in touch with Mike's partner, Liz Davies, who she has just spoken about, an advocate, a very, very successful, advocate, and also an activist in London. And so I wrote to Liz and I said, we did this podcast. It'll be great if you can have a listen, and I'm sure you might enjoy it. But also people are asking about the book. So do you know anything about any plans that the publisher has? And it's 25 years. Would they be interested in coming out with an anniversary edition? And so she said, it's a good idea. I don't think they will be interested, but I can check. So she checked. And then they said, no, we are not interested. We don't have any plans. And so the next thing that I suggested to Liz is, okay, now that they are not doing anything about it, will you be willing to give me the rights? And I can find a way to publish it for, a cricket loving audience. For whatever reason, she agreed. And she said, sure, this is a great idea. And anyway, I plan to keep a few copies, but yeah, sure, you can go ahead. And so she got the rights back from them. She sold the rights to me, but then who am I? I mean, what am I? How am I going to buy these rights? So since I had a podcast, we also, along with my friend Mahesh, who runs the podcast with me, we set up this entity called 81 All Out Publishing.
81 All Out is the name of the podcast. Please do follow.
Yeah, 81 All Out, because India got bowled out for 81 in a famous test match in Barbados in 1997. That's how deeply that has left a scar. But anyway, so we set up 81 All Out Publishing, and we said, okay, so let's incorporate it, and then let's buy these rights. Let's get this book. Interestingly, the original publishers who were bought over by Penguin after that didn't even have the manuscript. So we had to salvage the manuscript from in various ways. Don't ask me how, because that may lead me to trouble, but we salvaged it. And finally, we went through the whole process. We got, by the way, this is not just me. We had help from scores of people for this project, designers, photographers, editors, journalists, there are a lot of, it took a village to help us, even lawyers who had to advise us. And finally, the book is out. It is with Sharda now. It is on Amazon. It is an e-copy. And it's a great privilege to have some kind of ownership of a book that I so adored and loved.
When you think about this, because I knew Mike, I'm just thinking he would be just laughing. He would be just sitting at the back of the room and laughing to hear that this entire army of people had gone, or village, not army. The entire village of people had set about to trying to get this book out to the public. And in a way, you would think that it's the subcontinental public that will sort of respond to it. When you wrote to Liz, Sid, I must tell you this, she wrote to me. And she said, okay, who is this person who's asking me for this? So I said, no, I've given him your email, and this is how it works. And she's a fantastic human being. She's a lovely person, and she understands that all of us know her through Mike. And so all we go to and we talk to her is Mike all the time. But she was lovely. She was just in her home in London. If anyone visits and says, I'm Mike's friend, and gets in touch with her, if she has time, she'll meet you and she'll say, okay, these are Mike's books, if you would like to have some of them, if you know. But Sid, tell us about War Minus the Shooting. When you look at it now, as someone who was not involved in it like I was as a journalist, as a young a cricket fan, what do you think now is particularly prescient about what the book tells us?
I think one of the things that we take for granted now is how, corporatization is very much part of the game, and that, cricketers' bodies will be full of logos and their bats will be full of logos, and you will have DLF maximums and Citibank sixes and name it. I mean, this festival, I'm surprised we are not calling it Bangalore Literature Festival or something, So we take it for granted. But in 1996, it was at the early stages. Things were happening. That World Cup was extremely pivotal in that sense, where the corporates were rushing in and realizing the potential of the Indian cricket market. And it was around that time also that the axis of power was shifting. The economics of cricket was shifting from the UK to the subcontinent and to India. And that World Cup pretty much made it clear that, the future lies in Asia and in India. So that we took for granted. Mike questioned it. Mike said, all this may be happening in other sports, all this may be happening in other walks of life, but why aren't you people even asking any questions about it? Why are you people taking it lying down? Because I also think the reason for this is because Mike had followed the New York Yankees very closely in the 1960s when he was growing up in New York. And he saw that he had grown up with baseball being corporatized. And he saw basically what happened to it 20 years later when the game, everyone took it for granted. So he said, okay, boss, we have all gone that route already. At least you people ask some questions. No, Why are you just saying that, okay, this is the way cricket is going to be? So that one bit of corporatization, and of course the political angle was extremely prescient. That was around the time when, just a few, I think a little after that, BJP, the Vajpayee government came to power for the first time, that famous 13-day government. But then after that, the BJP juggernaut has only grown more and more, and now we know where it stands. But Mike saw it very early, and he saw it through cricket. He understood how cricket, being the vehicle of nationalism and jingoism, was also very connected to the political forces at play, whether it was Shiv Sena in Mumbai, or whether it was the BJP's gradual ascent, or in Pakistan, how presciently he saw Imran Khan. I mean, he read him so well. He understood that, why Imran Khan could be like a potential political force. And so everything, I mean, if you read Mike Marquesee now, you're like, this book could have been written today, but it was written 25 years ago, which gives it that much more glory.
One of the interesting things in a conversation that I had with Mike very early on, it just struck me, is he said, what I like about Indian cricket is that the crowd response is spontaneous. They're responding to the event that has happened. He says, whereas in American sport, you've got these these DJs, and you're saying, they're shouting defense and whatever it is at a basketball match, and it's orchestrated. He said in India, it's not orchestrated. It's spontaneous. It's real. And now, of course, where we are, is that it is orchestrated at IPL games, and you've got this chanting, and but the book still contains a great love for the region. Mike was very ill for the last 7 years of his life, but he used to keep sending us these e-letters. You didn't know how to write to him and what to say. And, so he was very angry about how, fighting against cancer, like it was a war. He said, this is valorization, it's rubbish. This is, and he used to get very angry. So you didn't know how to communicate with him, but you just felt very relieved when his emails would land up in your inbox. And the last email that he wrote, he had so much energy that you knew that he'd have a great time going after all the people that we go after these days. He said, okay, I've had this this stem cell surgery was done. I'm fine. And I'm just really happy that I'm going to be ready to fight the bastards. That was the last line of what he wrote. And then there was the last email that he wrote. But his affection and his love for cricket and cricket things is what resonated, at least with me as a cricket journalist, and his affection for sort of South Asia, the life that there was. But at the same time, it was not sort of rose-tinted glasses. He was very, very clear about what he liked and what he was talking against.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Mike's love for cricket in the subcontinent was like a parent's love for their child. I mean, of course, they absolutely adore, any parent absolutely adores their child. But at the same time, they're also extremely critical of how they are, in various stages. And that's exactly how Mike was. He absolutely loved cricket in the subcontinent. And he even says, one day cricket is fabulous. It's jazz, it's pantomime, it's entertainment. What else is there? I mean, it's fantastic. But at the same time, he was surgical when it came to criticizing aspects of the game and the way in which it was going. And that, is true love. I think, you don't just want to accept something blindly. You want to also question every aspect of it.
I suppose that's the difference between love and worship. It's like two different things. Why don't you share with the audience here about how he responded to crowds and what happened during that semi-final which got delayed because people were chucking things on the ground?
Yeah, Mike Marquesee also in his younger days was a very, active, protester. He took part in many of the anti-Vietnam War protests in the US. And then, of course, when he went to the UK, he was very active in politics, in sort of activism. And so I think he understood crowds instinctively. And the Eden Gardens crowd, sort of the reaction that they had, Mike Marquesee writes one of the most original sort of pieces about that crowd disturbance in the book. What he does, and this is astonishing for me even today, and each time I think of it, it is astonishing, is that he goes to the game, he sees the match, and then he sees people throwing bottles. Now, what is the automatic reaction of a journalist when they see people throwing bottles? You report it, you write it, you say it's shameful, you criticize it. But Mike Marquesee went outside after the game. He goes to those and he says, he finds the people who are throwing bottles and he says, now you listen, why were you throwing bottles? Can you explain to me why you were throwing bottles? First of all, this is an absolutely remarkable thing to do. But then he actually breaks it down step by step. And he says, okay, it's one thing to say they're throwing bottles and disturbing the game, but why? You're selling this grand national dream. you're saying that, you're building this alternate reality of saying that India winning a cricket match is equivalent to a nation, showing its strength on the world stage. And obviously, if India loses, they're thinking that the nation is shamed and they're throwing bottles. Who's at fault? They are at fault or you're at fault? So, that kind of thought is so original and so refreshing. And each time I read that chapter, I'm like, wow, how amazing is that to distill all that in that brief period of time when you're at the game and then write it. It's just phenomenal.
When we're looking at that sort of expression and that analysis almost of what happened with crowds, and we're looking at where we are now, where you cannot even cheer for the Pakistan team if you're a fan. It doesn't matter whether you're a Hindu fan or a Muslim fan. You cannot even cheer for them. So this is sort of where we've reached. Mike said something in one of his messages that he sent because he was a political activist. At one point, he had gone to the Million Man March in Washington, and his father and his parents and all were very involved in this. And he was so fed up. He said, I came back from the march and said, what is going to happen? We keep going. It was against the Vietnam War. And he said, we keep going to these meetings and nothing happens. And what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? And about 30, 40 years later, Nixon's papers were released to the public, and they found out that he had been thinking of dropping a nuclear bomb on Vietnam. And then the march happened. And they said, no, public sentiment doesn't look like it's right. And at that time, Marx said that then you realize that basically all of us who protest, all of us who go out, all of us who do these things, we are always going to be the losers because we are contesting against power. But the point is that when the time has to come to shift, our voice sort of will be heard.
He genuinely believed, in what he called the democratic spirit of cricket. And, he felt that it was still at a stage when he got in the 70s, when he began understanding the sport, he felt it was still at a stage where, the corporates hadn't totally come in and the game hadn't completely sold its soul, as we may say today. And that really drew him to the game. And he loved watching county cricket. He used to go to many of the county games just to, take the rhythms of cricket. And I think he liked the fact that, one could just go spend a day watching cricket, not really having to worry about anything else, and how cricket also was woven into the fabric of society.
Thank you so much for all of you for being here. Please do buy this book if you haven't. If you know someone who's bought the book, borrow it for them and read it. It's absolutely sensational. And I think a round of applause to Sid and 81 All Out for having reprinted it. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot. That was a lovely session. Thank you, Sid. Thanks very much.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.